you want to start at the beginning? Why did you volunteer for your first tour? Like what was it, and why did you volunteer for it?
The first tour was a clerk tour, so for me as a clerk. I was a corporal at the time, and there was a couple of us applying to go. So really it was out of friendship, a bunch of us going together. Not that we'd all be selected, but at that time it was just more camaraderie and friendship to get out there together.
Was there a professional reason that you wanted to go? Did you, like...
I guess even though I was a corporal, I had worked for a long time getting the troops ready to go. So that was, I guess, 1996, and it had started in 1992. So between those years, I was the one getting their files ready to go, and somebody suggested, well, why don't you go this time? So that was part of it too, professionally. Yeah.
So by 96, the war, the fighting part is over, but that's still a pretty fresh memory. What kind of concerns did you have?
Being a young soldier, I think that I was just not really concerned so much with what was going on, because it was, I guess 1995 was when it went to I-4, the Dayton Accord coming in and all that. I wasn't really concerned with actually the political stuff at that time until we actually got there and we were told what the climate was at that time. Yeah.
So what was your expectation before going over there about what it was going to be like?
Actually, since that was my first tour, I didn't really have a lot of expectations. I was just going in. I think more the expectation was my little bubble of I was going into a French orderly room, more of what my working environment would be as opposed to what it was in the actual country at that time. We were told that we'd have to do QRF. We were, in our pre-deployment training, we had that kind of training, everything in the field, role players, everything like that, the weapons training. So we were aware of the possibility of going outside the compound, but we already knew we'd be in the compound. So it was, like I said, more of my working environment in the office as opposed to what it would be outside. Sorry.
So what were your concerns in that regard? Like, are you a unilingual Anglophone, or do you speak French?
I was bilingual at the time, and I became even more bilingual after the tour. So originally, being a young soldier, I was not pleased with the idea or being told you will not speak English in the orderly room. So that was one of the things that concerned me. Although I was bilingual, just being a young soldier, I was kind of angry at that. But it worked out okay. Actually, there were quite a few who were Anglos in the orderly room as well. So when the boss wasn't there, they would speak to me in English, that kind of thing.
Before you went over, had you been to Europe before?
No. Actually, no. I should take that back. I was, as a kid, I was a cadet, so I went over to France on an exchange trip. But that is the only time.
So what were your... Let me just tell me a little bit more about your preparations. How well prepared were you, do you think, for what you encountered in Bosnia?
In terms of working in my trade in the office, I think I was well prepared. We had the 6-month pre-deployment training. So we did go to Farnham for a little bit, and then we did 6 months in Valcartier in the actual environment with the people we were going to work with. We pretty much can do the same job, but it's overseas.
And so what were your first impressions when you, like, how did you get into Bosnia, and like what were your sort of that first day?
From what I can remember, actually, it was something different. I had seen parades with the battalions before, but not necessarily with the French battalion, so it was overwhelming, actually, to say the least, just because that wasn't my first language. Although I was bilingual, I was still translating a little bit in my head, so that was quite overwhelming. When we formed up, seeing all the Vandus, as well as service battalion, the battalion I was with, as well as the medics, all the support that went with us. So that was kind of an interesting environment going over. And then once we got there, being surrounded by French, but we turned over, I guess, with the English battalion. And strangely enough, I encountered some people who I knew from the cadet world. They were in the Army as well. So it was interesting to see that exchange of English to French, and then just being in the building that we were in showed where we were living. I had never lived in an ISO before. And so all those things going into something new was actually quite overwhelming, but for me as a young corporal, it was pretty exciting.
So what did it, like, where were you and what did it physically look like? What was your living situation?
Okay, we were on the Black Bear Caserne from what I remember. So it was a compound. I think it was a couple of, actually I'm not even sure what the buildings were before, maybe a warehouse, or it was a large block of a building. I think it was like 3 stories. There were offices in there. It was quite clean. Beside it, they called it the Kmart. It was actually, that was dilapidated. You had to be careful walking up and down the stairs. There was rubble everywhere, but in our building proper, it was quite clean. The units before us had cleaned it up, made it a functional office space, an office building, I would say. Surrounding it was, obviously we shared it with maintenance. So they had their fuel bladders in front of it. There were the protective, actually sea cans, I do believe it was. And then there was a helipad, as well as other sea cans, I can't remember. And beyond that, past the perimeter fence was a farmer's house. And around it were just fields, some trees, just like we were in the country, actually. It seemed like it.
Did you ever go outside the perimeter of this camp?
I do believe, I think it was 3 or 4 times, because at that time we weren't allowed. It was just a changeover from UN to NATO. So we were, the only time you got out is if you were a trucker. So I did get out for a convoy. I don't remember where to, but we just got in the trucks, left for a day, came back. I did get out with the Czech heli-det on one of their helicopters. And then I think that's it. We never really got to get out for those 6 months, really.
So what was that like then, if you're literally there for 6 months, you know, doing the job you're familiar with? But was it claustrophobic? Did you find you were dying to get out somewhere, or was it okay?
I think it was okay, because for myself, I always have my own hobbies. So if we were in our own ISOs, I just did my own thing. And if we were made to, like on my own time, if we were made to leave, they had like a canteen, they had clubs. And then of course, when you weren't on shift, that's what you were doing. I had made friends, so hang out with them. They tried as much as possible to have all those extra activities for us to participate in. So I wasn't feeling cabin feverish, I guess. After a while, I took up running, which I never really liked running. And so running around the compound was 8 kilometers, and I got pretty good at that. So, yeah, I was okay. And I know what you mean. I'm thinking about it now going, oh, I didn't really get out. But I didn't go stir crazy either. So I kept myself busy.
So what was a typical day for you, like in terms of what you would be doing for your job? From
what I can remember, the office job was like what it would be in Canada. You take care of all the administration. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember it was a regular work job. Sometimes, obviously, when troops would come in, we would, because we lived right close to the orderly room, we would be woken up and do like a dag-ag type thing if required. As a corporal, there's certain things I was told to take care of, so that was my little bubble at the time.
How many, you're pretty good, you moved just a little bit. I'm just curious, like from a woman's perspective, were there many women as part of this task force, and did that make a difference at all? What was that like?
On the pre-deployment training, I actually noticed that. Not for me, but for the young ladies who were trying to get in with the infantry battalion, with the Van Duys. They were very little, and they worked really hard. I remember that, but in the end, they didn't get selected. For myself as a clerk, the majority of the people going on the pre-deployment and the tour itself, it was all women, pretty much. So does that answer your question, kind of? I can't remember really what the...
I'm just curious, like, I sort of imagine that there were, hundreds and hundreds of men and maybe a couple of dozen women.
With the service battalion, it was a good mix. I think 50%, because there were the truckers, the maintainers. The majority of them were men, maybe one or two women, but there were a lot of clerks, admin as well as finance, welfare was women, so it was a good mix. I would say 50% because it wasn't just all men, right? In the 4th month ogling you, I remember that it was equal, like it was 50%, at least on our little base.
And so is there a day that stands out for you, good or bad, or or an incident, something like that you can tell a bit of a small story about?
There were a couple of things, and if you kind of think that would have been the second time really that I spent in Europe. I wasn't aware of all the different the nationalities, or even just when I was on OP duty, and you're there all day, and I was just watching this farmer all day, and he took advantage of the bright lights at night, and he would work till like 1 or 2 in the morning building up, I can't remember what it was. I'm gonna say it was hay, but I watched him for probably 4 hours. He had a tiny bushel of hay, and it grew to the largest thing I have ever seen. So just watching the day-to-day activities of the farmer outside our front gate, as well as the passerbyers. That was pretty interesting, just watching them. And the other thing that stood out as well is the civilians that worked with us. It was interesting to see where they walked out of, where they came from, and what we had. So I guess at that age, I really appreciated, even though I didn't see where they lived, they showed me pictures, and it made me appreciate, what I had back home.
Just because they had so little, or?
Actually, the countryside was lush and beautiful and green, and then you put their houses against that, which had no windows. It was all gray. Half the houses were rubble. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't proper houses. They weren't proper houses. And you see clothes hanging out of them, and you're thinking, wow, she's so well put together, and she came out of that house. Do you know what I mean? Is there running water in there? Like, you never see lights on. Like, it was just amazing. I remember standing there going, where do these people come from? And wow, we're so lucky, right?
So what was it like to go from that and then to come back home to Canada?
I really did appreciate my mom a lot. I appreciated my friends. I think I just needed something to do because you were on a routine, right? For work reasons. You were on a routine, and I needed something to keep me busy. And just talking to people as well, being a reservist, coming back, you didn't have all your friends. Because actually that's 2 of us from our unit augmented from units in Valcarce, so we were far removed from many of the friends that we had made, right? So 3 hours away. So it was just an odd feeling, almost like culture shock coming back, getting used to being with your friends, being outside of a compound, right? So it was just different.
I should have asked you at the beginning, how did your friends, how did your family react when you said, look, I'm going to Bosnia for 6 months?
I think just my friends were pretty excited. My two of the main friends were actually, they're sort of not very well versed with the Army life. I had just been in there probably for 3 or 4 years, or around that time, I can't remember. But so they were really, really excited. And when they came to see me off, that was even more exciting because they went to an actual base. Like, they went to Valcarce and saw all the soldiers. So they were pretty amazed and I think proud. My mom, she was, she's by herself. So she was, proud of all the things I've done throughout my years, and this one in particular. She never told me if she was worried or not. I'm pretty sure she was. That was a time when there wasn't cell phones. We didn't use email a lot, and so I didn't. Mail was gold. So I would get correspondence from my friends, and they would still be excited. Tell me what's going on. Can't wait till you come home.
Did you, at that time, did you get to go on HLTA?
I did. So I didn't really, you see it now and you think, wow, you could go so many places. Back then I was dating, as well as I just wanted to be in an English environment. So I think on my HLTA, half the time I did go back to Canada. I saw my boyfriend at that time, who was actually Chris. So funny enough, I don't tell a lot of people this, but I guess it'll be on camera. I did go to Wainwright for a couple of days on my HLTA. I think of it now and I say, wow. But then I did go to visit my sister in California. I would say a North American HLTA. But I think I made up for it during my R&Rs. So that was good. Yeah.
So where did you go for those?
R&R, I think, I can't even remember the places. Budapest, actually, yes, I did go to Budapest. And the second one, I can't remember where I went. But it was with the friends who were on tour with me. I had no concept of you should actually plan who you're going with. I think I just stood in the line and say, hey, where are you going? You want to go together? You want to share a hotel? So it was nice. It was very touristy. We just walked around and drank, had a good time. Yeah.
Was that like a 96 hours?
Yes, yeah. So pretty much a weekend, a couple of days. You're on the bus for a while with everybody else going where they're going. They tell you where to meet back, go away for a couple of days, come back, a day of traveling as well. Yeah.
What do you think, how do you think this tour, do you think it changed you in any way?
I think it did for, specifically because my regiment at that time, they were bilingual, but mostly Anglophone, just where we were situated. So I had a real appreciation for the language, I think. And I appreciated that I became more bilingual. And I did try really hard to imitate what everybody would say in French, so that, being immersed in that, having to speak French, that was something from that tour that I took away, was, and it was amazing. And just meeting all the new people. It was a base, I would say, where like Grand Central Station, where you had the Czechs coming in, you had all the multinationals coming in, everybody came through there to go elsewhere. So you met a lot of people. The IPTF were there as well. So you had the opportunity, I made the most of my opportunities to meet with people, because we had to stay on the base. So I would try to meet other people, right? And that's what stood out. I guess just the social connections was a big thing.
A bit more of an international outlook, maybe?
Right.
Sense?
Right.
What did you learn?
Within my trade, or just as a person?
As a person or professionally?
Right. I would say watching all the locals, they always had a really positive outlook, especially the ladies that we worked with, like the people in the laundry. It's a common thing, because there's only so many places you could visit. The people at the canteen, the people at the laundry, and the people you work with, and the kitchen, the people in the kitchen. So they always had a positive outlook. They never asked us for anything. Maybe a couple things. I remember a girl asked me to look up something from the Sears Wish Book or whatever it was, but they never really asked for anything. They were always positive. So that was pretty amazing. The hard work of the farmers, day in, day out, just amazing. And smart, taking advantage of our bright lights and stuff like that. And also everybody who I worked with, there was a lot of interesting interpersonal stuff going on, so it was interesting to watch. I would say, as an outsider, not 5 Service Battalion wasn't my unit, but I would watch from afar, so it was interesting in the behavioral aspect of how it goes, or how a tour changes people, or how things go throughout the 6 months together, right? When you're together like that. So things like that opened my eyes in terms of, at that age, of how the real world was, and then how you see the reserve unit as opposed to the big battalion worked, and how their people interacted with each other.
Can you just be a bit more specific? You're kind of alluding, to this whole idea of people living, working together. Things go well, things don't go so well. What are you trying to say?
Like, should I give examples, or is that not appropriate, kind of?
It's whatever you're comfortable saying.
Okay. Well, just to be quite frank, I was quite surprised. I guess naive at that age, and also being in a regiment where you're really tight and you take care of each other. Being with a service battalion, everybody took care of each other, but they also had their own little thing. Things were going on, like just, you always hear of relations, like people cheating on each other or whatnot. And you saw that, or I saw that, and I didn't like that. But, you would never say anything because that wasn't really my family. People accepted it, and I didn't know what to say or who to say it to, I guess is what it is, being an outsider, and still being on my own, but everybody was still my friend. I found that was difficult. Is that what you mean? Like, what kind of, yeah. I would have to say at that age, I was quite shocked at that, because I thought, hey, we're all adults here, what's going on? But, years later, you realize, oh, that's what was going on, right? Yeah.
How did you see, like, what was kind of the rhythm for the tour in terms of those personal relationships or how people got along? Do you know what I mean? Like, was there a definite sort of like
turning point,
arc or turning point or something? Yeah.
Briefly, I think we were given a kind of introduction for the newbies of what might happen. One of the main things was, always be vigilant. Keep your eyes open. We're in a place that is multicultural, Americans, Jamaicans, Czech, and they're always looking out for the ladies. So they did warn us as part of the rhythm that the third, fourth, fifth month, people get kind of loopy, women and men. So expect it. And what they meant by loopy is they became a bit friendlier. And so you just had to be careful about that, which was interesting because it happened. And I was thinking, wow, I guess they know their stuff, So that was a main thing out of the rhythm that interpersonal relationships that we were warned about was, yeah, it happened. Yeah. And then I don't remember which month, but some people would get cabin fever and angrier. I don't remember which month, but you knew it was time. Like, it was a turning point, and we were almost going home. People were getting grouchy. And
what about alcohol at that time? What was the alcohol policy, and what did that lead to? Do you recall?
I do remember it was 2 beers per person. It wasn't really, I didn't think it was a big deal. You mostly saw it when people either left for R&R or came back, and then at the end of the tour as well, because on the parade square there was all this booze, and you could claim whatever you had, whatever your allotment was, and there was a lot of booze left over. And I remember thinking, wow, who's going to drink all that, right? Where's that going? But during the tour it was 2 beers per person, and I don't think we ever went dry, and I think that was fine. We never had any flare-ups that I saw. I was just a corporal, right? So it didn't really affect us. We had our 2 beers, busy days, so that was almost enough, right?
What about, just getting towards the end of this tour, what about the friendships? You've alluded to them. Tell me a bit about, like, how good, I don't know, how strong they were, or how they might have changed. Are you still in touch with people from this tour? Actually,
a couple of people. Obviously, going into a French battalion on pre-deployment training, it was pretty difficult because, first of all, you're going for a job that is actually all the reservists we were all going for the same job. It was kind of tough, and then got tougher when you realized, oh crap, I'm going against that person who's my friend. So at the time we were all friends, and I think we kept it pretty civilized when we knew who was being selected and not. So that's like the reservists, right? In terms of, there was one other person or a couple of people from my regiment that were going through the selection, and only one other made it. We remain really good friends to this day. We were always friends at the regiment before that, but going to the same tour, we're pretty tight still, actually. Whenever we see each other in Montreal, we always take pictures together. So it's kind of odd, but we do remain friends. In terms of the people there, the locals, I did keep in touch with probably one or two of them, the ones who actually married Canadians and moved to North America. I kept in touch with them. Sadly, I didn't keep in touch with the ones who stayed back. And in terms of the international people that I met, I still keep in touch with actually one of the IPTF guys who lives in Germany. And the one from the Czech Helidet, I don't really keep in touch with. But if I actually kept up with that, I think I'd still be friends with them right now. Some of the soldiers, obviously, they've probably had at least 5 or 6 tours since then. A couple of them I've kept in touch with, and I would say out of the 5, I still talk to one of them. So there's good intentions, but we never follow up with it. But the ones that I did stay in touch with were pretty tight. That's our connection, right? Especially the ones that I met on pre-deployment training and went on tour with. And I know they've been on many other tours, so I always, we always talk about how, well, that's my only tour, really. But we're still friends despite all the other people that they've met, right?
What about, like I asked you about what it was like being a woman soldier over there. What about as a reservist? Once you were like a month into the job, or did the way that you were treated because you were a reservist, did that change at all from the pre-deployment to the deployment?
I have to say that I didn't really notice that as a corporal. But there were times when some of the troops would come in and they'd look at me and they'd actually speak in English. And they'd say, I do remember one guy, I don't remember his name, but he just said, "I can't believe it." And I was like, "You can't believe what?" I appreciate you as a reservist because you've proven that you could do the job in French and you have skills. And then I was thinking, well, what did you think, right? But I didn't say it out loud. But I appreciated that he actually said it out loud. And he said that my view of a reservist has changed. Thank you for your hard work in getting whatever it was that he had to get done. His personal admin, that was nice to be appreciated like that. But otherwise, yeah, you didn't really notice it. Well, I didn't as a corporal at that level.
What about the English-French thing? The French Army versus English Army and the way things get done. Any observations from your point of view at the time?
At the time, being young, I was actually, I was pretty pissed off that at the beginning, and the adjutant told me right out, "You will not speak English in the orderly room." It was for the better because I became even more bilingual. By the end of the tour, I could joke, I could lead, I could do everything in French, and I didn't have to translate anymore, so it wasn't as tiring. But at the beginning, it did make me angry that they said, "You will not speak English." I did not see a lot of, she's an Anglophone. I didn't see a lot of that. It quite possibly could have been that they were talked to before. And you know how catty women can be. And I saw it on my early days on course, the English women versus the Francophones. That was pretty fierce, but you didn't see it on the tour. And I think because I became friends with a lot of those clerks or truckers or whoever else, that they knew what my goal was, which was to work, have a good time, and not to mess around. I wasn't going to mess around with any of their family members. Do you know what I mean? I was there for a reason, for my job.
So when you look back at that whole experience now, 20 years later, what do you think? How do you remember it?
Well, I do remember it fondly as well. I did actually learn quite a bit, people-wise, language, how things work with a service battalion. And when they say outside the wire, inside, well, I know what inside is, but I also realized that as a clerk, you could do the job in Canada as well as overseas. So I really appreciated my trade even a lot. It's one of those transferable ones. And in the pre-deployment training, it was surprising to me that also you didn't really have to go too much out of your comfort zone because you were already doing it every day, right? Yeah.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you about this tour that you want to say, or any sort of blank you want to fill in?
Nothing that I could remember. I think I touched on a lot. The friendships, the work, the people who worked there, the civilians. Well, I didn't really mention, well, I did talk about the countryside. I was amazed at how peaceful and beautiful it was, despite, the war that was winding down, what was going on. That was interesting to see that.
Was there any violence, explosions or anything, any sort of alerts or alarms while you were there?
At that time, no, not that I can remember. There was one time actually I was in, the safe spots, and it was just an odd thing. There must have been a siren to go there, right? And some guy, there was only one other person in there. It was a strange thing, and he looked at me, and he knew me, and I didn't know him, because I had forgotten, like after being in the Army for a few years, I had forgotten that I was in the Air Cadets for a few years prior to that. And he knew me from that. Like, he remembered me as a good friend, and I just thought that was odd because I guess there was a siren went off. We had to go to the safe place, and there was this guy who knew me, and I was just, this is surreal. I can't think of anything else that I wanted to talk about that tour.
So tell me about, so it's what, I guess 15 years later or so, 95? No. 2005? Yeah, well, 15 years later, then you go into Cyprus. So just sort of bring me into that story. What was that job? What was that opportunity?
So where I work, it's for tasks. And there was a task that came up, and my boss at the time, he said, well, we need a female bilingual warrant officer. And then I put my hand up slowly. I guess that's me? What do you mean? So he suggested that, there's this task going on. Would you be interested? Okay, because I do like adventure. And I thought, well, why not? What is it, Oh, it's the duty warrant. Oh, what does that mean? Oh, when you're in charge of closing up the mess, it might be like that. And he was a seasoned master warrant officer, so I'm sure he could have told me a bunch of stories of what it could be, but he just left it at that. That's how it started. Got more information, went to Kingston for the pre-deployment training, met the people who I would be in charge of, and my officer, and we both didn't have experience like that. So I was hoping I'd get the mentorship. Didn't necessarily get that, but I wonder if he was hoping the same thing. Oh, I'm getting this warrant. She's going to help me out. I was a new warrant. So it was quite an experience, actually, starting out anyway.
So what was the job?
Oh, okay. The job was a duty warrant officer, duty platoon. So basically, the duty platoon is a warrant officer with an officer and 4 or 5 private corporals. And we were the bridge between the soldiers and I guess the specialists. So the specialists being mental health, the medics, the padre, and then the prerequisite briefings that they had to sit in on. So we were there to make sure that they were safe, the clients were safe, or the soldiers, and they still had their wallets in their pocket when they came back from their activities.
So can you just take a step back for somebody that doesn't know about decompression and where it was and how it worked. Can you just give me that kind of overview?
Sure, I might give it too brief, but it's basically TLD, Third Location Decompression. So it's another location between Afghanistan to home, basically. And it's the stopover, 3, 4, or 5 days, depending on the flights. So the soldiers would go there to decompress, go from dusty Afghanistan to home. Basically, if you think about it, it's quite a culture shock. So there was this little spot in between, and that's where we worked, the Third Location Decompression.
And so what was the facility and where was it?
Okay, this one in particular, so there were many previous to this, but this one, I do believe, was the closeout in 2011, closing out Afghanistan. So this one was at one location. It was a hotel called the Asia Hotel in Paphos, Cyprus. It was right by the water. It was a 4-level hotel. At one point, there were civilians there as well, but after that first chalk, as they call it, that didn't last long. It would just be military there. Yeah. So it was actually a beautiful looking resort. The water, every morning waking up to, the Mediterranean and it was just beautiful resort, yeah.
So beautiful setting. What was the sort of the nitty gritty of your job there, sort of day to day?
Without giving too much information, depending on how much you want, I just, some of that stuff was not personal, but it's something that maybe not all the families are prepared to hear or want to hear. So I'll just, in a nutshell, is basically soldiers decompressing, whether it's hanging out with each other by themselves, whether it's having drinks or just going on the activities. So it was that side, as well as their briefings that they had to go to help them transition back, or to help them realize what they were going back to.
So can you just maybe take me from the start of, let's say, a 3, 4, 5 day cycle? A chalk comes in. Mm-hmm. How do they come in? What kind of state are they in when they arrive in Cyprus?
Okay, so just picture the front of the hotel. The bus, like 3 buses usually, would pull in, and all these soldiers in arid uniforms would come in. Some of them had pillows. They all had their backpacks. They all looked pretty tired. They would come into this beautiful hotel, stand in the atrium, and then shuffle into the, huge dining room, where they would be given the spiel of, these are the briefings, this is what's going to happen, you're going to get a room key, we're going to do the briefings right away, no drinking until after, that kind of thing. So they'd get the lowdown of what was expected in that first 4 or 5 hours. And then after supper, that's when they could have their first drink, I guess it would be. And just festivities in the night. There were no activities at night, just drinking. So just hanging out. Some people didn't drink at all. Others just wanted to be by themselves in a quiet spot, right? Or they just wanted to chat with the duty platoon. So basically, that is what it was. When they were in the briefings, we would just be at the front desk, like we had a duty desk, and we would take care of everyday things, I guess. It was more our busy time was in the evening for the first chalks. And what it would be is, just say if it was 4 days, there would be a new chalk every 3rd day. So a cycle of the first day, the first 2 days they would get their briefings, and then they would do activities. So fun activities, golf, go-karting, fishing. And then just for the people who like the tourist historical part, there were tours in Paphos. I think other locations, I'm not sure if they were in Omedos or Larnaca, but there were other touristy, if you didn't like the physical stuff, like the go-karts or the sports or whatever.
So to what extent would soldiers take advantage of those organized activities, or do they prefer to do their decompressing in their own way?
Pretty much, I think you could sign up for 2 or 3 activities. Everybody would do an activity, like the hotel would empty out. If something happened, like if you had too much to drink the night before and you were too sick to go, well, you stayed in your room and you slept it off, right? But it was pretty much empty during the day. As the chalks went on, there might be more people in the building, example, like hungover or with the medics for whatever reason. But usually it was empty during the day. The hotel would be empty during the day, just the staff waiting for everybody to come back.
So you mentioned that when the first chalk arrived, when you were there were civilians in the hotel.
Correct.
And then there weren't. So what happened there?
Well, as you can imagine, so you just get back from being in a huge dust bowl, 6 months of doing your job. You come back and you just want to kick back, whether you like to drink soda pop or beers. It would get pretty rowdy in some cases. And we would know based on, if you look at the chalk names or the trades, basically, if it was combat arms, if it was service and support, or civilians, because it was a closeout. So we would have the PSP people coming back as well. And other CSS trades coming back. So we could gauge what kind of activity might happen based on the trade of the chalks coming in.
So give me an example.
Okay, if the chalk was all infantry, we would know to be on higher alert because maybe they need to decompress with a few more beers. Maybe not, most likely. If it was CSS, I recall there was still quite a large amount of drinking, but not necessarily as not overboard. That's not a good way to say it, but like just a decompressing. If there's more physical activity, you'd have more physical, like fights possibly when it was combat arms trades coming through. As opposed to the PSP civilians or the nurses and doctors, dentists, truckers, clerks, that kind of thing.
So what did this mean for you in terms of can you tell me, give me an example, like with the previous stories, a day or a situation that you had to deal with that kind of sticks in your mind? Good day, bad day?
There was okay, after you get through the first, this is what the routine is going to be. It was always different, but we knew that if it was a combat arms chalk, it would be challenging. Challenging in terms of, because their day is so exciting or relaxing with what they did, but they're only there for 3 or 4 days, so it's kind of a nervousness as well that, I have to reconnect with my family. I'm leaving my regimental family, and whether they were reservists or reg force, that would have had to grade on a person, right? And depending on what they were going back to, was it a successful tour in terms of, are they going back to their wife or husband, or is there a separation coming up? Are they having to reunite with their families? That really changed their behavior and possibly their amount of drinking as well. So we would have a rowdy night possibly, and it was different throughout the whole 3 months. I guess it was really different. We figured out, okay, prepare, the combat arms are coming in, or this group or this unit. So we kind of knew what to expect, but there was always, the what do you call it? The human, the way you are is different every time. You react to situations differently. When you're in a situation where you are with people for 6 months where you have to get along, maybe that was the time when I don't want to talk to you, or I really don't like you. So you have to be careful. You as in maybe the soldier, it's hard to see. It was, at times it was quite volatile. You could feel it in the air. There was one interesting time when an infantry warrant officer came and hung out with me by the desk, and he goes, "Can you hear that? It was very early on in the time there, and I was like, "No." He He goes, listen, oh, something's going to happen. And he could actually predict by just listening. So I would pay more attention. And sure enough, probably like 5 minutes after he said that, you could hear the broken glass in the bar, and we'd have to run in and sort things out. But it was interesting, actually. Yeah.
So if I understand you correctly, you're basically, it's like a 3 months of, you're the duty warrant officer, right?
With the staff, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've never had to do duty for 3 months straight, you know, as a duty officer or whatever. What was that like? Like 3 months of that were nightly drama, rowdiness. What was that like? What kind of effect did that have on you?
First, at the beginning, because I was just a new warrant, so I think I put I was thinking, man, they're going to expect a lot out of me. And that's a pretty demanding thing, making sure everybody is safe physically and, you know, as much as you can mentally. We weren't specialists, we're soldiers, right? So being the liaison or the transition, well, between the specialists and just the soldiers' good behavior, it was actually quite challenging. There was always something different. I felt that I didn't have enough experience, but I guess you got to just let things happen and you learn from it, and you just go from there. Yeah, it was pretty challenging, and I was always on high alert, I felt. Obviously, when I had time off, you could relax, but then you get up. It wasn't always, oh, what's going to happen today? But, you know, when you knew what kind of chalk was coming in, you kind of prepare yourself. Of course, it might not happen, but something else would happen. There's quite a few times that I was like, wow, that the human body can take that much. Oh my goodness, that's what happens when you hit that limit? What?
So what was the worst thing you had to deal with?
I think just seeing people, actually it was probably when I first started in the Army, the first 7 years was just a big party. And I felt at some point, it's coming back to me. This is karma. I'm taking care of the people who have gone too far, you know. It wasn't like that every day, but it was enough to make you realize, just to watch people go from being fine and sober to just doing too much of it. Yeah.
How important do you think that was in terms of, as you mentioned at the start, right? What people have been through in Afghanistan and then having this third location before they get home. How important was it, do you think, that the Army allow people to blow off steam in this way?
My opinion is that it's pretty important. There were times where I was thinking 3, 4, 5 days is not enough, but maybe it is for that time. But there's no way, I think anyways, that people should be going home from what they experienced, what they saw, to going home cold like that. Do you know what I mean? Because it is a culture shock. Like, you go from your regular routine, the intense heat, talking, acting the way you do within the Army, to going home to your family. If you have kids, you're not going to talk the way you do around the troops or whatever, or, you know, depending on what weather you go into. Like, it's so different. I think it is important to have that. I don't know for the mental health part, other than the prescribed road to mental health briefings that they got. I heard good and bad things about that, but I think it's important, even if you didn't use whatever they taught them or briefed them on, at least it was out there. Whether they chose to listen, it was out there, and maybe they might reflect on it a few months later or right away. It was delivered to them and they got that information. I think that's important. Yeah, the briefings, coming together, being able to come together as a group and say goodbye to your friends. If you were a reservist, maybe when you went back, you wouldn't see them right away. But maybe as a formed battalion or whatever, I think it's important, even just to close it off, to have that, I guess, closure. But yeah, to blow off steam, some of the things that we saw. I mean, as a concentrated group, I'm sure you don't see that much shenanigans or debauchery or whatever. You don't see that much in a concentrated period of time. And seeing that, you realize, yeah, you don't want that to happen in somebody's home. You want it to happen in this third location. And if some people just need that, right? Get it all out, and then I'm ready to recharge. I think it was really important. And I felt bad for the people who were, I'm not sure if the injured soldiers were able to get that. And I'm not sure if other people like who went to not only Afghanistan, but Congo, Sierra Leone, other locations that see different things. I don't know if they got that, but I thought in my head, everybody needs this. You need that transition, even if it's 2 or 3 days. I think so. To talk about things with other people who have gone through that as well.
Well, and did you find that, you mentioned this infantry guy that was talking to you about, anticipating what was going to happen, but did you find that people would come and talk to you? Like, you're not a counselor, but did you find that sometimes they perhaps treated you that way? They
did, and I don't know if the other TLDs had the duty platoon. I think each TLD was different in the makeup. But in talking to some of the PSP or the ladies who facilitated the activities, they said they liked that in between. But it was challenging because our specialties, I'm a clerk, a couple of infantry guys, there was an artilleryman, there was, different trades, but we weren't given, mental health, or we didn't have specialties in mental health or whatnot, right? I think that was challenging. I didn't think for what we did that it was, the word isn't fair, but it was really challenging, and I wish for myself that I had a little more preparation on the mental part. People did, come and talk to us, and I think it actually probably for a lot of the people on the duty platoon, we probably learned how to listen a little bit more and not necessarily react in what we would normally react. We did see repeat things, and we learned how to deal with them. But it was pretty tough because we're not specialists, right? And if you're a specialist, I do believe that they would talk to people when they were not drunk. They would prefer to, I don't know if the word is treat people when they were not drunk. So who takes care of those guys? Well, the duty platoon's there, right? Go to bed, comes back. Go to bed, comes back. Go to bed. Things like that, like babysitters, but it was important because without them telling us, we knew eventually we had to keep them safe, make sure they came back with their wallets in their pocket, that kind of thing.
What kinds of things when soldiers were talking to you, let's say after hours or whatever, what kinds of things do they want to talk to you about?
Some of the older ones would actually talk about their family situation. Some of them were sad, others were, just talking, yeah, I'm excited, my son or daughter's doing this, I can't wait to see them. And some of the, I don't remember all the details, but I do remember the ones talking about their families. And sometimes they'd say, this is my third or fourth tour. We would learn what not to say. Like I remember saying, well, your wife or whoever, your partner must be really excited. Oh, not this time. I'm not going back to a wife. You know what I mean? It was like, oh crap. You kind of learn what to say, or what, like I said, what not to say. So the family stuff was interesting to hear based on that. And you really saw different personalities just because we were stationed at a desk in a place where you could actually keep an eye on everything. It was an atrium, So you could keep an eye on what was happening on all the levels. And you could react, run upstairs if you need to. And there's always somebody by the front door, which you could see the bar at the same time. So it was a good spot, I guess, people watching. So it was interesting to see, just not talking to them, but seeing the way they carry themselves. The body language, that's what it was, yeah.
So you describe what it was like when they arrived, got off the bus in their air cab hat, their backpacks. They haven't had a drink yet. Mm-hmm. What are they like 4 days later when they leave your location? What was that picture of that scene like?
So ideally, if they had the opportunity or they set themselves up to be able to participate in the activities, that pretty happy, excited to go home. A different kind of vibe, right? So if we had back-to-back chalks, so every third day, there would always be the ones just coming in and the ones leaving. The different, air, electricity was going on. So mostly the people leaving, obviously excited. If something had happened, well, medically or whatnot, obviously take it in stride, but still excited to go home. And the young ones nervous a little bit. Yeah. So that was kind of neat to see. When I did encounter people that I knew from my brigade, that was pretty exciting because I don't think people expected to see me. So I would, towards the end, I'd yell out their name and they'd be like, "What? What are you doing here?" And you know what? They were really excited. And then they would tell me months later, "That was so cool that I saw you and that you took the time to say hi to me." Yeah, so that's kind of neat. Yeah. There was excitement coming in, a little tired excitement. The activities, hanging out with each other, and then the excitement to go back home. Or it could have been nervous excitement too, right?
When you look, it wasn't that long ago, but 5 years ago. But when you look back on this experience, are you happy with it? What do you think? How do you think of it?
Well, if you think about how I would do things better, for sure, it's 5 years later, you learn more stuff. You learn what you learned at that time. It's kind of like in hindsight, I would have done this. I think back to some of the situations, and I know if I was given that opportunity again, I would change things, do things differently. But I have to say I really learned a lot about the behavior, how people behave. And a lot of the people passing through, a lot of the people in charge of some of the chalks, just talking to them, learning, especially that one warrant who originally said to me, listen, something's going to happen. Just to be aware of your surroundings a lot, and you could forecast things just by the sounds, right? So it's pretty interesting, yeah.
Did it feel better about humanity or worse?
Well, I did see a couple of things that, I realized, well, who was that? The booze talking. There are a lot of times things would happen and people would be so embarrassed they wouldn't even come out of their rooms for whatever happened. And there's one guy who was like, "I am so sorry for whatever." I said, "You know what? We're not here to judge. We're soldiers too. We're here to make sure that you're safe and that you have your wallet in your back pocket." And it was really important because you would get nickel and dimed if you messed things up. Like if you, I don't know, soiled a pillow sheet. That was expensive. So we wanted to take care of all the soldiers there, right? And make sure that their time there was fun and that they actually, went home with not too many Band-Aids, and stuff like that. Do what we could do anyways, right? Yeah.
Is it the kind of thing, would you ever do it again?
Because I've already done it before, I probably would do things a bit differently as well. Not so much interested in, the bodily fluid stuff, but I mean, we've all been there. Maybe not for that length of time, but we've all been there. And if it happens, I have to say when it happens, like right now, like again, Like if I see a situation like that, I know how to take care of it, but it brings me back to, not a flashback, but it makes me think, oh yeah, remember TLD? Like I keep thinking to myself, if you could, handle helping that amount of people in those situations, it's fine. You can take care of this one thing. Not that you want to. I remember a couple of times when I had friends who were really, really drunk or whatever, and I was like, you know what? You brought this on to yourself, whatever. But other times it's like, oh, yeah, I know what to do. Just, lay here, recovery position. You know what I mean? Here's a plastic bowl. Here's a Gatorade. It's so interesting. Yeah. I guess I would do it over. I understand a bit more. So, I could react differently. I think I would, yeah.
Is there anything about that experience that you want to add to what you've already said?
I just wanted to say that, talking to other people, everybody's experience as staff on TLD was different. I think this one was very interesting. Well, you really saw the human behavior part. How things unroll in front of you, almost like a movie as you go on. There's so many chalks. I think there was over 20-something chalks. But our main goal was for the troops. You knew how important it was, so just get the job done. I can't really think of anything else. There's a lot of stories, for sure, good and bad, but really interesting experience, yeah.
It's, as you're describing it, I'm just thinking this would make a great movie.
It would, but I guess as we're talking, I'm thinking not all the soldiers want that out there, right? I guess it would be, but to show people what it's like, and just being the person watching it all. Yeah, I was thinking, wow, this is amazing. What an opportunity. But each TLD was different, so I don't know if any other TLDs would have the same type of intensity, all the personalities. It was really interesting.
Is there, just to wrap things up, like in total here, is there anything for either one of those experiences that you want to add, or is that good from your...
I can't think of anything. If you kept asking me questions, I would answer them, but I can't think of anything. At the different stages in my life, they were good tours to have. If I had any in between, for sure it would add to it. But those, like right at the beginning of my career, and then like recently as a senior NCO, I think they're good tours, I guess, or overseas experiences to have at that time in my life anyways, yeah.
Like how many years do you have in now?
26.
26 years. How important is it in the big picture of your career that you did these two things?
Oh, I would say huge, like really huge. Even though, the TLD one, that it was really what my boss had told me. It's like trying to close up the mess. Wow, to the nth degree, like to the furthest range that you could think of, even more so, right? You learned a lot about mental, physical limits the body can go through. Those two were really important tours, I guess. I've done a few things in between, like instructing and stuff, but those two, they made a difference. They changed things, the way I did things and the way I saw people, especially how people interact with you, what you watch, what you see, the drama, if you want to say. It was pretty interesting. And actually both, if you think about it, is as an outsider, right? With the service battalion being an Anglo, not being part of the battalion, watching, which is basically what I did, people watching, seeing how things roll out. And the same thing with the TLD. Being that person watching really is what we were doing, taking care of people. But it was amazing, yeah, for the human behavior aspect of both. As a young 20-something-year-old and then as an older person, yeah, there were significant tasks in my life, for sure.
That's great. Thanks very much.